In today's video, we have the latest trade talk around the NHL. Today, we focus on teams like the Maple Leafs, the Senators, and the Flames. We have some updates on some injuries around the NHL, especially on Jacob Peltier and Kyle Palmieri. Vasilevsky is another player out long-term for Tampa. Waivers news, and Connor Bedard makes his much-anticipated preseason debut tonight. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover in today's video. Let's get started first with the news of the day on the NHL waiver wire. There is a video out earlier today in case you missed it. Several players were placed on waivers. I'm just going to quickly recap the names. If you want more of a detailed analysis, you can check out the other video. But the Canucks goaltender Spencer Martin on waivers, also been mentioned in the trade rumor mill as well. Wouldn't be shocking to see him either picked up on waivers or traded after he clears. You have Cal Burke with the Avalanche on waivers, and the Penguins have a bunch of players, including young defenseman Ty Smith, forward Rem Pitlick, Jonathan Gruden, and Xavier Ouellet. So obviously the Penguins are trimming things down now. Of course, the teams are not looking to necessarily move on from all these players. The intent is to get them down to their AHL affiliates so they can go to those training camps. Some of these players have enough experience now that they need waivers, and this is what they have to do to get there. For guys like Martin and Ty Smith, especially, maybe Rem Pitlick, I think they'll get the most attention, have a chance of getting picked up. And even if they're not picked up, clearing waivers enhances their trade value, in my opinion, because if a player is picked up on waivers at this point in the season, they're going to have to remain on the team that picks them up on their main roster for opening night. And they can't just demote them, okay? Once a player clears, they become more valuable. The NHL team that acquires them has the option of leaving them either to NHL or AHL level. So we'll see what happens, but certainly the waiver season is upon us. We're bound to get a decent amount of players probably on waivers pretty well daily now for the next week and a half as teams trim down their rosters, try to get players to their AHL affiliates, and make their tough decisions in NHL training camps. As I mentioned tonight in preseason action, the much anticipated debut of Hawks forward Connor Bedard, the number one overall pick in the 2023 NHL draft, will get to play on home ice tonight at the United Center against the St. Louis Blues. It's going to be a potentially historic night. I know it's not his first registered game because it's not the regular season yet, but a lot of people have been highly anticipating to see Bedard in action. A lot of people wondering how many goals is he going to get, how good is he going to look. The Hawks appear to be putting forth a pretty decent roster. Be curious to see exactly who he lands up with tonight and how things go, but it's going to be a terrific game. I'm sure there's going to be a huge crowd in person there in Chicago, and we'll be curious to see how the first overall pick fares in his first game. As we also mentioned in the earlier video today, we got some devastating news in Tampa. The goalie Andrei Vasilevsky is going to be out of action for an extended period of time, upwards of about 2 months. It could be around end of November or possibly a little later if things, if there's any setbacks, before he's able to play NHL games this year. That's a huge problem for this Tampa team who relies heavily on Vasilevsky as their backbone. He needs to have surgery on his back due to a disc issue. They tried doing injections, I guess, back in August because that's when the things first started flaring up. I think by the sounds of it, probably tamed things down a bit, came into camp, started having the same issue again, tried some other methods of like rehab type issues, which explains why we've seen him skating on his own and working with the different coaches on limited ice instead of being a full participant. And now we know that things haven't been going well, and they've opted to go the surgical route, which will be a more permanent, healing process. But it takes time, and it's a big surgery. So ultimately, goaltenders rely heavily on their mobility and flexibility. And I don't know if this will have any long-term impacts. The team seems pretty confident that it won't, but sometimes you just don't know. And will he need that much time or more to recover? We'll see. I mean, he certainly will be eligible for long-term injury reserve, but right now, Jonas Johansson would be the next guy to be stepping up to be starting goaltender for the Lightning, and that's not a great option. No offense to him, but he hasn't done well in his brief, limited amount of NHL action here so far. So that's going to be a big blow, as we've seen in the playoffs the last few years. And even in a regular season play, like if Vasilevsky's off, the team is completely different. And without him, they're expected to be a different team. I know some teams that they're in a division with that are up-and-coming teams, like Buffalo and Ottawa especially, looking to get good starts to the season. Well, this might be an opportunity for them to bank some points early and try to build up a lead on one of those veteran teams like Tampa that, if they get too far behind early, it might be difficult for them. So I can't imagine that the Lightning aren't going to do anything. I know reports from Tampa media were indicating that they spoke to Julian Breezeball, the GM of the Lightning, asking how they were going to handle this situation. And they made it sound like their intent right now is to get the other goalies in camp up to speed and used to the idea that Vasilevsky's not there, so they all kind of move up on the depth chart and have to take on more responsibility. They have Johansson. I think Matt Tompkins is there. Very limited experience as well. And really that's it. And they made it sound like they were going to deal with things internally and not make a trade or anything. And I find it hard to believe. I mean, this team is ultra competitive. And if they don't address the goaltending, I can see a situation where they get off to a bad start. And like I said, you can't win the cup in November, but you could lose your opportunity to play for it. You know, we've seen team after team every year have a bad start and have a strong finish, and it's not always good enough. So some options they could look at. On the UFA market, there's still a guy like Jaro Halak who's looking for a contract. We know he wants to play. Former Lightning goalie Brian Elliott, I don't know what his status is or if he wants to continue playing, but he's not signed either. Although last year, I must say, wasn't the greatest for Elliott. I don't know if they'd want to consider calling him or not. As far as other options that they're going to have between waivers, or trade, I mean, look at the waiver wire right now. Spencer Martin's available. They could pick him up or trade for him after he clears if he doesn't get picked up by another team tomorrow. The Flames are looking to move Danny Vladar, so Dustin Wolf will get a chance to play, not have to go back to the American League, but the Flames are not hard-pressed here. They don't have to do that. Wolf can go. He doesn't need waivers. So unless they get a good deal they're willing to accept, they're not going to move Vladar. They'll wait and do that when the right deal comes along and promote Wolf, internally when that option comes. But another option, like look at the Leafs. They might be putting Martin Jones on waivers if they're assuming they're going to go with Samsonov and Joseph Wall. That's an option. Maybe Marty Jones is a guy that gets picked up. They can get help from their, in division rival in Toronto. I'm sure the Leafs would love that. Or will the Leafs go a different route here to protect Jones? It's hard to say, right? But there is some options out there with some availability between UFA and trade. If putting Vasilevsky on LTIR certainly creates a huge LTIR pool of money, so they can make it work cap-wise to make it be compliant for the start of the season. Whatever they do, they just have to make sure they have a plan as well, because Vasilevsky's not expected to be out all year. So certainly, they have to be able to activate him later on, so they need an option and a plan to be able to do that if another contract comes in. So we'll have to see where things go, but I'd be real curious to see how the Lightning handle this whole Vasilevsky situation. It's a situation they really haven't been in before, losing him for an extended time. Kyle Palmieri hasn't been involved with the Islanders skates so far. Early in camp, a typical Islander fashion, a lot of secrecy around the injury or whatever's going on with him. They keep saying he's day-to-day or he's maintenance or what have you. But when asked about the season opener, whether or not he'd be available to him, Lane Lambert was very non-committal and leads people to think that his injury or whatever he's dealing with is more serious and that he'll be out longer term. So again, we're looking for the Islanders to see how they address that. They do have some interesting prospects in camp, looking good so far, so we'll see how things go with them. The injury to Jacob Pelche in Calgary sounds pretty serious. We did know he was going to be out indefinitely, need surgery. Based on the injury and everything that we've learned so far, it does sound like it's likely going to be a 4 to 6 month type of recovery. The Flames haven't confirmed that just yet, but unfortunately for the youngster, it sounds like he's going to miss a big chunk of this season, maybe not be available till near the very end, depending on how everything goes. I'd say probably February at the earliest. It could be into March, into April, depending on how the season's going for the Flames. That may or may not mean that he plays any games. It's difficult to say. It's one of those injuries you want to be careful. You don't want him to rush it. At the same time, he'd probably like to get games in to know how he feels for next year and all that, but it's tricky, but certainly not good news at all. I know with the signing of Backlund, now the injury to Pelche, it makes you wonder the future as well for Lindholm and Hanifin. There's still lots of talk and chatter in the rumor mill about their futures. I know Elias Lindholm, I think they're going to have to offer him an 8-year deal, over $9 million to get it done. That's what it sounds like. Now with Backlund staying and being named captain, the fact that they get a new coach, new GM, everybody seems to be a lot happier in Calgary with a lot of the changes. The atmosphere is better. I think the odds of Lindholm staying are better than they were before, but I think it is largely about money. So at the same time, if they're not willing to overpay here a little bit, I don't know they're going to get that done. I still think Noah Hannafin's a much more likely trade person that we're going to see moved out here. I think that the possibility that he could stay with the Flames, but they do have a pretty deep blue line, and I'm not really sure exactly what he's looking for in a new contract. I know they haven't really, sounds of things, haven't had a lot of talks, and I think even though he said all the right things and open to staying, I think ultimately Hanifin will be the main player out of the ones that are left that does get traded sometime this season. It's hard to say exactly when. Like I said before, I think a team like Buffalo is a almost perfect landing spot for him. Wouldn't be shocked, depending on what happens with the Bruins, and if they can figure out a way, which they probably would struggle to do right now, but if anything changes with their situation, I can see the Bruins. They've been really interested in Hanifin for a long time, so I don't know if they'll get into the sweepstakes or not. They'd have to clear out some space, figure out a way to do it. But at the end of the day, I do think that there's a better chance Hanifin's traded, a better chance Lindholm stays, but the contract is going to play a big role there for everything when it comes to Elias Lindholm. And we'll see what Conroy gets done. I know he's keen on keeping him, but we'll have to get to work there. When it comes to the Maple Leafs, a few things that they're working on, as I mentioned a few days ago, there's still a lot of, I guess, secrecy, uncertainty around Calle Jarnkrok. Some people think it's that a trade's in the works. Some people think it's an injury they haven't disclosed. Nobody really knows, but they do need to make some moves to become cap compliant, and they don't absolutely have to make a trade. But I think with the roster that they're going to want to keep, the players that would be eligible to go to the minors without needing waivers, or some of those players that could go, are not going to be guys they want to send down. So they might be kind of forced to make a move here. But some guys have been looking real good. Like Connor Timmins is having a great preseason. Lafferty's look good, and some of these like bubble guys. So they're making it hard on the Leafs to not necessarily make a trade. Timmins is leading the preseason in points so far. But John Klingberg, apparently, he was dealing with an issue last night against the Sabres. All they said was something tightened up. We don't know how serious that is. Depending on exactly what's going on with Klingberg, if he's not able to start the season, for example, if he's going to be out for a bit, that's going to create a major opportunity for Connor Timmins. I can't imagine Timmins, with how he's played in this preseason, and if Klingberg's going to be out for a bit, that's a huge opportunity for Timmins to move up in the depth chart here and take on a bigger role in the top four, at least temporarily. So I don't think that Timmins is going to be the guy they move to get that flexibility. Martin Jones likely needs waivers. Like I said, I suspect that he'll be on waivers and that they'll go with Samsonov and Wall. We'll have to see. Or will they find a way to protect Jones? Because they need the space. They really can't carry three goalies. But a lot of people think that Jarnkrok is going to be the odd man out here to be traded to figure out their salary cap situation. And it could be. I know a lot of fans are kind of on the fence on what to do with him because he is a utility type player. Played a lot in the top six last year, put up career numbers. But is there an opportunity for him to play in that spot again after bringing in Domi and Bertuzzi and what you've seen out of Matthew Nyes late in the year? I don't think that's the case. So like I said before, as much as I like Jarnkrok as a player and he fit well with the Leafs last year, I don't know that you're really fair to expect the same production out of him, because if he does stay, he's definitely going to be stuck in the bottom six unless they run into a slew of injuries. He played with Matthews. He could play on the Tavares line, but when you have, like I said, all those other options they brought in over the offseason, I just don't see a spot where he can get in there. And you obviously have other guys fighting for bottom six roles. Like they get brought in Ryan Reeves, you get David Kampf. Lafferty has looked well, as I mentioned. They might sign Noah Gregor if they can figure that out and find a space. It's just hard to imagine, a spot there for Jarnkrok to be productive. I mean, the third line very well is going to probably feature, depending on if they keep Nylander at center and go with the Matthews, Tavares, Nylander 1, 2, 3. That obviously creates a little bit more room on the wings, but at best, Max Domi, they had Domi with Nylander, they had Tavares with Lafferty, and maybe Jarnkrok. He might have a chance to play in the top six again if they go with that setup. But again, it's difficult, and he has the perfect contract to move to kind of clear up their issues cap wise. But again, it's something they're going to tread carefully with. And if a guy like Klingberg ends up out for a while. We know Dylan Gambrell's another guy out with a concussion. The injuries are starting to pile up here early. They may not be significant players or huge contracts, but they all add up. And depending on how long some of these players are out for, they may or may not be able to figure out some flexibility. But if Klingberg's out to start the season, but he's not going to be out long enough for an LTIR situation, that complicates things even further because they get no cap relief. So it's difficult to say what Toronto does, but I know this Yarncroke situation's got a lot of people thinking that a trade's coming. It does make some sense to some degree, but they do have other options too. Be curious to see how they handle everything. In Ottawa, again, they're still looking to sign Shane Pinto. A lot of eyes on them and how they're going to handle this. Matthew Joseph was absolutely flying last night in their preseason game against Montreal. Joseph scored 2 goals and he was just flying up there. Now, he's fast anyways on a good day, but he was really working extra hard to prove his worth. I mean, the Sens iced basically closer to the equivalent of an AHL roster. They're like most of their big guns were not in the lineup. No Brady Tkachuk, no Tim Stützle, no Batherson, no Norris, no Tarasenko. So you had like Joseph and Kubalik and Ridley Gregg were like your top 3 guys, and Joseph was just flying out there, and he was proving that he's worth more than people think. So either Ottawa's looking at this going, wow, maybe we can't trade this guy, or other teams are looking at him going, geez, maybe we should take him off their hands and reduce the asking price to get him to pull the trigger here because he's looking pretty good. But a lot of people are still convinced that maybe the better route to take here is to keep Joseph and to trade from the back end. I think a third line of Kubalik, Joseph, and Pinto would be phenomenal for Ottawa. If they can figure out keeping him, I think it'd be better. I think they really need to find other means here of making the cap work with enough room to get Pinto on the books. I know it seems like they want to sign Josh Bailey. I'm not completely sold it's the greatest idea. If it's 1 year league minimum, I guess it's not the end of the world. They can always put him on waivers if need be, and bury it in the minors. So, I mean, there is ways to do it that are risk-free pretty much. But, trading a guy like, Eric Brandstrom might be an option. Travis Hamonic and Jacob Bernard-Docker in the back end haven't looked great so far. And same with Brandstrom. I mean, you like Shabbat and Zub, Sanderson, Chikrin, they all look pretty good, but your guys auditioning for your third pair right now, Clevin has been okay, and I suspect that long-term he's going to fit there. A lot of debate if he should spend a little time at Belleville, and I'm not opposed to that. I think that could benefit him. But I think he's right now looking like he's ahead of guys like JBD, or, maybe, and I don't know, Brandstrom hasn't looked the greatest either, but it's just hard to say. Brandstrom's been hit or miss. I think if you trade Brandstrom, then that's going to give you over $2 million to work with. You get Pinto in the works. I don't know about Bailey, but it should be at least enough to get Pinto's contract done. You give it, you probably have to move Tyler Clevin to the NHL a little sooner, but it's not like he was just drafted. He spent a few years in college hockey, so he's a little bit older, a little bit more mature prospect anyways. He played a handful of NHL games at the end of last year, and he looked comfortable. So I don't really think of that as rushing him. So might be the better way to go if you're Ottawa. But let me know your thoughts on how the Leafs, Sens, and Flames are going to address their trade situation before the season gets underway and all the injuries we talked about as well. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.